I wonder how the Israelites felt when Moses told them that the solution to their snake problem was another snake. That has the bit of a feel of that strategy of parenting and punishment that upon catching one's young teenager smoking their first cigarette proceeds to make them smoke a whole pack at once to see just how cool they feel then. Is Moses playing a cruel joke on the Israelites? Is he just rubbing it in? God had rescued the Israelites from their multi-generational nightmare of slavery in Egypt and had promised to make them a new people of their own with land of their own. But here they are mid-journey to the land and they're complaining. They have become impatient again. They're complaining about food. Again, they have turned against God. And what does God do? In this case, God sends snakes. Snakes, the original symbol of human rebellion. Remember, the snake from the garden was the first one to suggest even the possibility of turning away from God. The snake invented the concept of disobedience, of choosing anything other than God's will. The snake was the problem in the first place. The snake represents human sin. So there is, yes, a certain irony in God sending snakes to punish Israelites in the first place. God is sending the symbol of sin and rebellion to punish the Israelites' sin and rebellion. God does, it appears, have some sense of humor. But you can then understand why some of the Israelites may have had their doubts when Moses comes out and mentions that now there's a new snake made of bronze and it's not a problem, but actually it's the solution to their problem. That anyone bitten by a snake now shall look on this bronze snake and live. You think that cigarette is cool? Try the whole pack. But then it was true. What was the problem is now part of the solution. Those who gazed on the bronze serpent were healed. I wonder how the early Christians came to adopt the cross as the central and most important image for their faith. I wonder how they came over time to inscribe their own foreheads, lips, and chests with the sign of the cross, to inscribe their bodies with the sign of the cross. I wonder how that process took place, so that they started wearing crosses around their necks, so that they started putting crosses on the walls of their churches, so that they started making crosses out of metal and processing them down the aisle to begin their worship. I wonder how the initial conversations about that went. I imagine a conversation between some second-generation disciples, someone who had never met Jesus themselves, maybe we'll call them Paul. And I imagine them coming to seek counsel from one of Jesus' original 12, say, the Apostle Peter. I imagine Paul coming to Peter eager to listen and learn. Only, as soon as Paul walks in, Peter is shocked and appalled for what is hanging around Paul's neck. It's a handmade necklace with a cross hanging at the center. How appalling and how gruesome, Peter thinks. And Peter admonishes Paul, "How dare you? Do you not understand? I was there. I saw how much pain he was in. Don't you understand? The cross represents the very worst thing that the entire human race ever did. The very worst thing I ever did. I was there and I denied him 3 times. I didn't even try to stop it. I was hiding out by the fire, That was the very worst day of my entire life. And you are now making this instrument of imperial torture and humiliation into what? Jewelry? How dare you? But Paul, you see, has read the book of Numbers. I assume Peter has too, but I'm just assuming for the sake of this imaginative conversation that he's forgetting that episode. Don't you see, Paul says? That's exactly it. If the God and Father of Jesus is the same God and Father of Israel, then when we read this story about the snakes in the wilderness, we know that this God is in the business of making the problem into becoming part of the solution. Read throughout the rest of the story of Israel. One thing we can know and tell about this God is that he, over and over again, takes what appears to be problems, what are genuine problems, and makes them into something new, into part of the story of the solution. This is one of the single most amazing things about our God, and it's something about our God that feels exactly what I need to hear today, at least. I wonder if it makes you feel hopeful today. There are obvious problems right now that we all share in common. This coronavirus thing that won't go away. But what we know, based on not just the story of the snakes and the serpents in the wilderness, but the very heart of the gospel, this message of the cross. The message of the cross is the way in which God took the very worst thing that humankind ever did and made that into the centerpiece of the entire gospel story. In such a way that over time the early Christians began to see that very instrument of imperial torture and humiliation as the most significant and substantive sign of hope and victory in the world. Something that they would use to identify themselves as followers of this Jesus. God has shaped himself so that no matter the problem that comes up, God doesn't need to just build a wall in front of it and then seal it off forever. God will accept any problem that comes up. Any problem that comes up in our lives, any problem that we bring to him, any problem that comes into our whole world from the outside, any problem that comes from a bat in a lab in China or wherever. There is no problem that can arise for which God in response just says no. That can't be part of this story. There's no room for that problem in this story. I don't want to hear about it. God never says that. God lets the problem in, over-accepts the problem, and then reincorporates the problem into a new and more beautiful solution than we ever could have imagined before. I know I've used this analogy in sermons before, but it's just the one that works so well in my mind. Just imagine that there's a classical piano concert going on. And the pianist on the stage is midway through this beautiful piece. But in the middle of that, someone's 4-year-old has managed to escape their parents' view temporarily enough that they've found the aisle and now they're running towards the stage. And the 4-year-old runs up on the stage and he runs right up to the piano and he starts hitting his fingers on the keys while the classical pianist is continuing to try and continue his piece. Now, in that moment, the piano player has a decision to make. He can stop. He can say no. He can step away from the piano and he can say, "Whose child is this? They've just ruined the performance. I have to start it all over from the beginning now." Or the piano player can invite the 4-year-old to stay. And because he's a very good piano player, because he knows every way that this instrument works, because he knows what chords are in what key and what notes this toddler is playing just by the sound of them, he can decide to use these new notes that the 4-year-old is playing to integrate those new, maybe dissonant sounding notes into a new song, into a new performance that no one has ever heard before. Imagine the piano player wrapping his arms around the 4-year-old and using his hands now to play a new piece that the world has never seen before. That is what our God does. No matter how little experience we have in playing the piano, no matter how dissonant the notes that our lives play, God comes around us and integrates any problems we have into a new solution. I don't know how that hits you on a personal level today. Another thing I know about this year is that many of us have discovered new problems in our lives that nobody else knows about because we don't talk to anybody anymore and we don't need to go outside of our homes anymore. Lots of us are carrying hidden burdens that nobody knows about. Many of us feel ashamed, maybe, of those burdens. But no, even in those situations, that God does not cut you off. God does not say, no, that's not allowed. God says, what does it look like for this problem to become part of the solution? AA is one of the greatest examples of this. How does every AA meeting start? Someone gets up and says, my name is Zach and I'm an alcoholic. Right out of the gate, that's exactly what that's doing. That's saying something that was a problem in my life is me. I'm here now trying to make that problem part of the solution, and the way I'm doing that is being open about the struggles that I've had and continue to have and how I'm bringing that into the room today. That same thing is true about this whole worldwide pandemic. We're not just going to snap back to normal and God's going to be like, all right, make sure you go back and do church exactly how you were doing it before. Make sure you go and live like this never happened. No, this is changing us. It's changing us in ways that have been really difficult, but not in any ways that God is not going to make use of for the future shape of our lives and for his church. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have everlasting life. A beautiful thing is that beginning that process of healing is just that easy. It's just about deciding where to look. It's about knowing that you've been bit and looking up at the snake. You see, we don't have to be afraid of any of the wounds that we have received. We have been given in Christ the means through which we can be courageous and looking back at those wounds face to face. And actually, it's precisely in doing that, in looking at that very thing that wounded us, that is the beginning of our process of healing. It's looking at the cross, that very worst thing that human beings ever did. That epitome, that perfect picture of our human rebellion and sin, that perfect picture of our inclination to humiliate and to kill. That looking at that face to face begins a process of revolutionary transformation in our lives that shapes us ever more gradually into something that looks like the resurrected Jesus himself. So if you're feeling down, like I'm feeling down, like everybody I know is feeling down these days, know that we are not forsaken, we are not lost. We have been given a God who over-accepts any problem we have and takes that problem and weaves it into some new and beautiful tapestry of his redemption.